In September of 2002, a 2-volume rabbinic biography about Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, entitled Making of a Gadol, was published by his son, Rabbi Nassan Kamenetsky. It's not an easy read. The first 60 pages discuss the early years of Rav Yaakov's life. The other 1,200 pages or so comprise confusing footnotes and rambling digressions delving into each detailed aspect of his life. When the book was published, it was meant to be the first in a series about the life of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. It sold for about $20. Since 2002, however, no further volumes have been published. You can now find the book on Amazon for nearly $1,000. What happened? Making of a Gadol is certainly not your typical religious storybook. For outsiders to the Orthodox community, the offending passages seem entirely innocuous. But for those who were raised listening to their parents read saintly tales of rabbis from previous generations, it was certainly jarring to discover that Rabbi Aaron Kotler wrote letters to his fiancée, or that the famed Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, known as the Chafetz Chaim, struggled with depression, or that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter smoked cigarettes. These were not the stories that mothers told their children. Jewish stories, it seemed, should be carefully sanitized to avoid sullying the reputation of their protagonists or, more dreadfully, the ears of the listener. Some members of the Jewish community felt these stories were casting rabbinic leaders in a negative light. A few weeks after the book was published, a ban was issued against the book. Posters, known as pashkevilim, were hung up announcing that the book was inappropriate and should not be purchased or read. This was certainly not the first book banned. Communities of all kinds banned books. And while for many this seems like a relic of the past, the question of censorship and what has become known as cancel culture has reemerged in contemporary times. The heart of the question of censorship is, what kinds of stories should we tell? Many have begun to question whether the stories we have shared about previous leaders, whether in politics, religion, business, or art, are the kind of stories we tell, and it hasn't gotten simpler. Years before Making of a Gadol was published, Rabbi Shimon Schwab, a noted leader of the German Jewish community in Washington Heights, appealed for stories of religious leaders that decidedly inspire. He wrote, "What ethical purpose is served by preserving a realistic historic picture? Nothing but the satisfaction of curiosity. We should tell ourselves and our children the good memories of the good people, their unshakable faith, their staunch defense of tradition, their life of truth, their impeccable honesty, their boundless charity, and their great reverence for Torah and Torah sages. What is gained by pointing out their inadequacies and their contradictions? We want to be inspired by their example and learn from their experience." Instead of a historical mindset, he preferred one that would uplift, but that also can come at a cost. Who will bear the historical record? Are we doing a disservice for previous generations by imposing our standards of decency on them? And are we holding current and future generations to a literally impossible standard against which we will woefully come up short? These are not easy questions. Whether it is our national, familial, or religious identity, they are all shaped through the stories we share. And every community has invisible boundaries that shape the values and ideas of those who associate. But what happens when those values are no longer deemed appropriate or members of a community seem to be telling the wrong story? Making of a Gadol is just one case study in the larger story of how communities shape their values through stories, censored or otherwise. And this is really a story about ourselves. The stories we share about our own lives, the way we look at our families and our friends. What one scholar called the architecture of the soul. The values we share and don't share shape our communities and ultimately shape ourselves.